sheep already prepared, and 5 seahs of parched grain, and 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and laid them on donkeys. And she said to her young men, "Go on before me. Behold, I come afar after you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. And as she rode on the donkey and came down under cover from the mountain, behold, David and his men came down toward her, and she met them. Now David said, "Surely in vain have I guarded all that this fellow was in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he was returned me evil for good. God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave so much as 1 mile of all who belong to him."
All right, now one more person reads so verse 27, and I'll take over.
Abigail saw David. She hurried and got down from the donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed on the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "On me alone, my lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the word of your servant. Let not my lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my lord, whom you said. Now then, my lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood, guilt, and from saving with your own hand. Now then, let your enemy and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. And now let his presents that your servant has brought to my Lord given to the young men of my Lord."
Thank you. Thank you for everyone today. So I'm going to skip to verse 32. David said to Abigail, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak." So the title, or I guess the theme of this message that I wanted to share with you guys, is the importance of good company, having good people around you in your circles.
You might want to speak louder because there's Zoom right there.
Oh, right. Okay, sure. Yeah. So the reason why I had you read this story was that last part when David's talking to Abigail and he's saying, "Thank you for this intervention that you had because I would have sinned against God." In Ecclesiastes 3:17, it says that God will be the one that judges the righteous and the wicked. But in this story, we see that David was provoked by Nabal, and in his anger, he was about to enact wrath against him. But wrath is God's decision. So Abigail prevented that poor choice from David. Now, it's important that we consider this because in literally the previous chapter, I think God is intentional with this order because it's almost ironic. In chapter 24 of 1 Samuel, we see the story about David and Saul. Now, at this point, David hasn't become king yet. He's still fleeing from Saul, who's trying to kill him and his men. And so in chapter 24, Saul is given the news that he is now knowing where David is. He knows the particular area that he is. So he sends him and his troops. But I'm going to start in verse 2 there. I'll just read it for you guys. So in verse 2, we see Saul took 3,000 able young men from all Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. He came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the cave. The men said, "This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish." Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off the corner of Saul's robe. Now later on, David explains that he had that opportunity to enact judgment against his enemy Saul, but he chose not to. And he explained the reason was because Saul was anointed by God. And he enacted that principle. He knew that wrath was God's decision. But then in the very next chapter, we see David flip. He changes his morals. He compromises it because he was given into his anger. So while David was provoked to this, that he was willing to compromise his morals, Abigail was the good company, the good influence in his circle that was willing to help him make the right choice. He prevented him from committing a sin against God by attacking Nabal. And now what's also important is that the very next chapter, chapter 26, it's again the same situation where he has an opportunity to attack Saul, but he doesn't. He enacts what Abigail reminded him of. And that takes me to the first point I want you guys to take into consideration. Good company reminds you of God's provisions and his commandments. As I stated before, Ecclesiastes 3:17 says that God will judge the righteous. Abigail reminded him of that principle from God. Now, Solomon, David's son, in 1 Kings chapter 11, serves as an example of this principle, but in the opposite manner. See, God advised Solomon not to be involved with the women of foreign nations because they would lead him to serve pagan gods. But in the end, he decided not to follow that advice from God. So in Solomon's case, he had what we would call bad company. He had people that took him away from God and what God wanted in his life. And as a result, Solomon would end up losing much of the kingdom of Israel. Now that kingdom was promised to David because David would obey. But when Solomon decided to do what God told him not to do, that's when he lost it. So it's important to have that good company because then you can receive what God has promised for you, and that's his blessings. It says in Jeremiah 29:11 that God has plans for you to prosper you and not to harm you. But if you have that bad influence in your life that tells you or leads you to a wrong path, you might not receive what God has planned for you. So good company enables you to glorify God through your behavior, such as living righteously, which contrasts with the lifestyle of this world. See, it's often difficult to live your life as a Christian because it often seems like the majority doesn't follow God, that they do their own thing. You know, that's what the Bible says, though, that the path of righteousness is the short and narrow path. It's not going to be easy, but it is the path that leads to God's favor and blessings. Now, the second point I want you guys to take is that good company ensures that you will receive what God has planned for you. Now, Solomon, like I said, lost the vast majority of the kingdom because he failed to obey God. And then there's now this generational pattern. Solomon's son, Rehoboam, follows the bad advice of his friends. And for that, I'll take you to 1 Kings chapter 12. Read that.
3-73.
Chapter 12.
1 Kings, 15 chapter 12. 373.
Did you guys have any questions from the first part that he saw? No? You good? What did you guys understand from the first one? What did you guys take from what he said?
I took something from the verse that that stood out. I think a lot of the time when we think of King David, we think of him as a more like perfect being because we refer to him a lot because he wrote a lot of significant parts in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And so we see him as someone who's more perfect, and almost we hold him similar to how we hold Jesus because he was so significant in the Old Testament. And so this situation, I feel like we don't really talk about this, like these kind of situations for King David. And it shows that even though King David was very righteous and he was with the Lord, he still had times where he struggled to control his own emotions or keep himself in check.
Nice.
Wow.
Nice. That was good. What did you guys understand about the bad company that he mentioned? So he was trying to do a contrast between good company and bad company, and then having God's favor and blessing in your life when you're influenced with good company versus potentially losing what God has planned for you when you're with bad company. What does that mean? What's good company and bad company in lay terms and in your everyday lives? Yeah.
Bad companies like bad people that are in your life, like pulling you away from God, and good people is like they're like encouraging you and helping you like believe more in God.
I say that bad companies are sort of similar to hers. Like bad company.
Talk louder.
Oh, sorry. Bad company are like people that have already been influenced by other bad people and want to influence you now. So it's kind of like a chain. They want to influence you now and they want to take you away from God. While good people understand the word and they want to help you get closer to him and have a connection with him.
That's good.
So I'm gonna start on the first verse of 1 Kings chapter 12.
Sorry. Where are you going to stop?
I'm gonna stop at verse 19. So Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had gone there to make him king. When Jeroboam son of Nebat heard this, he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon. He returned from Egypt. So they sent for Jeroboam, and he and the whole assembly of Israel went to Rehoboam and said to him, "Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke you put on us, and we will serve you." Rehoboam answered, "Go away for 3 days, and then come back to me." So the people went away. Then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon during his lifetime. "How would you advise me to answer these people?" he asked. They replied, "If today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants." But Rehoboam rejected the advice the elders gave him and consulted the young men who had grown up with him and were serving him. He asked them, "What is your advice? How should we answer these people who say to me, 'Lighten the yoke your father put on us'?" The young men who had grown up with him replied, "These people have said to you, 'Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter.' Now tell them, 'My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions." 3 days later, Jeroboam and all the people returned to Rehoboam, as the king had said, "Come back to me in 3 days." The king answered the people harshly, rejecting the advice given him by the elders. He followed the advice of the young men and said, "My father made your yoke heavy, I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions." So the king did not listen to the people, for this turn of events was from the Lord, to fulfill the word the Lord had spoken to Jeroboam son of Nebat through Ahijah the Shilonite. When all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, they answered the king, "What share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, Israel, look after your own house, David." So the Israelites went home. But as for the Israelites who were living in the towns of Judah, Rehoboam still ruled over them. King Rehoboam sent out Adoniram, who was in charge of forced labor, but all Israel stoned him to death. King Rehoboam, however, managed to get into his chariot and escape to Jerusalem. So the reason why I had you guys read that chapter was because that's another example of the bad company I was referencing. So Rehoboam was king, but even in his high position, he was in need of good counsel, because even for his position, he still needed advice on how to properly rule the people. He needed discernment. He needed wisdom. Now, he refused to listen to the counselors that advised his father Solomon. Now, I don't want you to miss this, but even Solomon had counselors, and you probably are aware of the story of King Solomon asking for wisdom from God. It said that Solomon was the wisest man on earth, but even the wisest man had good counsel. Even he needed good counsel for wisdom and discernment to rule the people. So now Rehoboam rejected those counselors' advice and followed instead the advice of his friends. But as you can see, that advice did not help him at all. In fact, he lost his throne because of it. So good company will help encourage you to keep moving forward in what God has planned for you. Rehoboam was the grandson of David. It was God's plan that David's generations would continue ruling. But because he followed the bad advice from the bad company, he ended up losing what God's plan and purpose was for that lineage. The next point I want to make for you guys is good company helps you to grow and mature in your faith as well as advance in life. Proverbs 13:20 briefly touches on this. It says, "Listen to good counsel and receive good instruction, and you will follow in wisdom." That's kind of what we've been touching about already in this lesson. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33 also says that bad company corrupts good character. So it's important that as a Christian you realize that you're very susceptible. Even if you're strong in faith, like David, he was a man whose heart was after God. Even when you're in that position, you are susceptible to bad influences. So it's important that you surround yourself with things that will bolster your faith, not weaken it. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14, it references a yoke. Now, you may not know what that is, but that's okay, because in farming, there would be two animals put together through a yoke. So it's basically attached to one neck of another animal, and then it's attached to the other. And basically that's important so that they stay together and that they can plow the field. But the Bible uses the yoke oftentimes as a symbol. Now, when it says that you're yoked with somebody, that means that you're sharing a burden. You're sharing a weight with them, because the yoke is heavy on the animal. Now, in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, it says, "Do not share a yoke with bad people." Because if you're sharing your burdens with those that won't be there for you or be there to give you that good advice to move forward, then you're just having an unnecessary burden. Then life becomes harder for you. Now, it's also symbolic of how when you're listening to the advice of bad company, you're yielding to those bad influences, and then that weight and that pressure becomes more on you. Now, the last point that I want to make for you guys, that's very important, is that the greatest company of all is God himself. Now, no matter who you have around you, there will often be a situation where you might feel like your back's been turned against, or someone has turned their back against you, that they've maybe sold you out. Maybe they failed you in some regard. But the good news is that God is there for you. He said he'll never leave you nor forsake you. He said that his plans for you are to prosper you. So no matter what, even if others might seem to fail you, God never will. During his ministry, Jesus assured people that God watches over all things on this earth. And to prove that point, he made an example. He said that God is aware of even when a small sparrow falls to the ground. He's aware of it all. So no matter what circumstance you're in, no matter what you're experiencing, God knows what you're going through. And as referenced, that's in Matthew chapter 10. Now, God knows you personally. He said in his word that he knew you before you were even in your mother's womb. He knows every detail about you, and he's fascinated about it. He doesn't just know it, he loves to know it. So God is our loving Heavenly Father who wants us to find happiness and joy. He created a plan for us to grow, to live by faith, and return to live with him someday in heaven. His plan gives meaning and context to our life here on earth, and it answers the questions that you might typically have about where we come from and why we're here on this earth. Now, through his commandments, the Holy Scriptures, and the prophets who speak on his behalf, he helps us navigate life to return to him. So I would end this with some guiding questions, because I think it's important that at least you have something in your mind when you leave this place. The first being, do you currently have good company? The people that are around you, would you consider them that good company? The second question is, are you yourself good company? Because it's very easy to look around you, but it's also important to look within. What you want others to be for you, be that for them as well. Be that good friend that gives that good advice. Be that person who's that good influence. So that way people will know who to come to, and that will be you. So keep that in mind.
That's an amazing answer. Let's answer the question. The first one was?
So would you say that right now you have good company?
Somebody else wasn't talking. Well, let's just say, like, how does it make you